Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to this ICAS webinar, From Isolation to Inclusion, Building Mental Wellbeing Through Professional Communities. For those who don't know me, I'm Johnny Jacobs, and I'm very proud to serve as President of ICAS. And alongside my professional career in finance, I sit on the board of the Mental Health Foundation, and I'm an advocate for mental health and wellbeing, both in the workplace and beyond. So it is a huge pleasure to be hosting this webinar on a topic that's hugely meaningful and it's vital to us professionally. Now, over the next hour, we are going to explore how professional communities can play a powerful role in supporting mental wellbeing. Now, why communities, I hear you ask? Well, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK, which is run by the Mental Health Foundation. Now, each year, the Mental Health Foundation select a theme, and this year's theme is communities. Now, people up and down the land will be celebrating the importance and power of communities, and being part of a safe and positive community is vital for our mental health and well-being. And we can thrive through having stronger connections with other people, and having supportive communities around us just reminds us that we're not alone. And we know that communities can create that sense of belonging and safety and give us a sense of purpose. So I hope that by the end of this webinar, you'll discover more about the power of communities and how they can support our well-being. You're going to hear some personal reflections and practical insights from our wonderful panel. Now, today also marks the launch of ICAS's expanded wellbeing offer, providing members and students, including international members and also immediate family members of the household as well, access to a suite of free support tools, including counselling, a legal helpline and a wellbeing app. So we've got lots to discuss, as you can see right here. And I am delighted to be joined by three brilliant panellists who each bring lived experience and professional insight into mental wellbeing within our profession. So first up, we'll hear from Indy Hothy, who is the former ICAS president, long-standing advocate for inclusive leadership and global community development. And Indy has worked on humanitarian aid projects across the world and has championed professional engagement throughout his ICAS journey. Then we're going to hear from Roma Thompson, who is an executive director at Morgan Stanley Fund Services, where she leads the Glasgow office. Now, Rona is also a qualified mental health first aider and has actively supported the wellbeing of trainees within her organisation. And with over 20 years of financial services experience, she really does bring deep insight into how leaders can foster supportive and resilient teams. And we're going to hear more on that. And then we have Lisa Bloom, who's a finance business partner at Lloyds Banking Group. And Lisa trained with ICAS during the pandemic and brings reflections on navigating early careers whilst also managing wellbeing. And outside of work, Lisa is a competitive powerlifter and an active volunteer within the powerlifting community. And her perspective is going to highlight that real importance of finding community and balance beyond the workplace. So we want this webinar to be interactive. So it is your chance to ask our wonderful panelists questions and to leverage our panel's brain. So you can submit those questions at any time in our Q&A facility, which can be accessed at the top of your screen. Questions can be submitted anonymously, so you can submit what you like. Let's get the conversation going. And you can also join the conversations through the chat box, which is also at the top of the screen. So whatever works for you, please get your Q&A in. Housekeeping matters, of course. Just to remind you, we're recording this webinar and we will make it available for on-demand viewing afterwards in case you wish to refer back to it, or of course, share it with others. Right, enough from me. We look forward to receiving your questions and hearing from our panel. So let's get started. Our audience can't wait to hear from our panelists. So to get us started, we'll do a bit of an intro and also give a perspective on the first question, which I think is really important, which is, what does community mean to you personally? And how has that shaped your approach within your career journey? So perhaps, Indy, you could get us started, bit of an intro, and then perspective on what does community mean to you?
Thanks, Johnny, for the wonderful introduction there. Yeah, I'm the past president of ICAS. I've moved from the world of sort of professional education to higher education, and I'm currently a council member for Queen Mary University, which is an extremely rewarding role. So going back to the question around community, I think for me, community is about connection, and not just in a sort of social, professional sense, but in a sort of deeply human way. Coming from the Sikh background, the concept of Sangat, which sort of directly translates to spiritual community that's rooted in civic engagement, is something that I've sort of grown up with and lived with. And it's the idea that, you know, when we gather together on sort of shared purpose, values, and service, we can elevate one another. So Sangat isn't just about sort of physically being together, it's about sort of growing together, where courage is shared, where vulnerability is accepted. And so that perspective has always shaped how I lead and think about community. And when I've applied that in practice, one that you refer to there, sort of my work in the humanitarian aid sector, thinking about how can organizations in that sector, you know, leverage local community groups, leverage communities that have been affected by natural disasters, and work effectively together to provide aid. And I really try to put that into practice with my work in that sector.
Thank you, Indy. Fascinating. I'm sure audience will have plenty of questions about some of the really tough work, actually, and some of the things you'll no doubt have seen whilst you've been supporting communities, particularly in the aid space. Lisa.
Hi, yes, I'm Lisa. I currently work as a finance business partner at Lloyds Banking Group. But as you said in the intro, I've only recently in 2023 completed my ICAS training contract and started my training in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. So quite a lot of experience around how isolating that can be, just working fully remotely. And I guess then coming back to the topic of community, how important it is to find communities and lean on other people in times like that. And I've also, throughout my life, I've lived in 5 different countries. So I've moved around quite a lot. And I think each time the main struggle at the start I found is the kind of lack of a sense of belonging or finding communities, which just kind of showed how important it is to find those communities, whether that's in work or outside of work, and just kind of get that sense of belonging and those shared interests or shared experiences.
Thank you, Lisa. And over to you, Rona.
Hi, thanks, and thank you for the introduction. And just to note that in addition to my day job, I'm also on the EDI committee of ICAS, where we do spend time with the great ICAS team looking at how we can support the members in the EDI perspective, and that includes also mental and physical wellness also. So it's great to work with the team on the initiatives that ICAS is doing. I think for me, community, not only do we have the community in our social space and with our families and in sports and in leisure and religion, etc., but also an aspect where we have a community which is very special as accountants and as part of ICAS. There is a community that we develop all the way through from those that we train with to those that we work with and those that we progress our career. ICAS has lots of initiatives such as the mentoring schemes and the foundation that people can work with, etc., that can create that community in addition to those that we have in our work and personal lives. I think that's a very special thing for accountants, and we should always remember that and utilise that to both support each other, but also use it for support for ourselves as well.
Thank you, Rona. I think that's 3 brilliant introductions and different perspectives that we'll be getting into in the next 35-40 minutes. And I liked how you mentioned ICAS there, and actually how we as a group and amongst our network can be a community, and I'm sure that'll be something that we can talk about, because I'm a big believer that we are part of a community. At ICAS, it's more than a network, it really is a community with sheer sense of values, and know that will come out. So, Indy, if I may come back to you, and I think many people on this webinar probably will be fascinated actually by your role as president. And if you don't mind me saying, someone relatively young in your career, and quite a milestone, and you must be hugely proud. And I know you well, and I know that community is really, really important to you. How did your time as the ICAS president shape your understanding of members' needs around connection and belonging and community?
And thanks, John. That's a really, really important question, and I think one of the most important lessons I learned as ICAS president is that leadership ultimately sets the tone for whether people feel like they belong, especially during sort of times of uncertainty. That sense of belonging, I realize, isn't just emotional, but it's foundational to sort of performance, resilience, and well-being. And I'll give some context to that answer. I became an office bearer and vice president in 2020 and president in 2022. So this is coming out the depths of the COVID pandemic, the killing of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, the cost of living crisis. And during that time, we saw how isolation, uncertainty, and burnout were especially pronounced across the workplace. When I was engaging with students, members, and employers, it was evident that CAs were not only dealing with professional pressures, but their own personal sort of mental health challenges. And that really made me reflect on what that meant for me in terms of my role as an office bearer and what role I could play as a leader, because it was quite a pivotal time with some major sort of tectonic shifts about organizations and professional bodies needed to operate. How do we support our students through education? How do we support our members? What does regulation look like in this kind of environment? And it was really multifaceted for ICAS as well, because ICAS is an employer, so there's a distinct role for its staff. There's a distinct role for its members, so students and members. And then also, what role does it play around this topic of well-being for the profession? So, ICAS really began on quite an important journey, I think, around sort of 2020, 2021, when we think about the broader ED&I agenda and the mental well-being journey at that time. And I'm sure you'll recall, Johnny, because you were an important part of that journey. We stood up the wellbeing group tasked with developing the sort of mental fitness strategy, which turned out to be quite an ambitious three-year plan, which was launched in 2021. With the aim to becoming the sort of gold standard in the profession, and to try and reduce the stigma, and to provide accountability, and to provide resources. And I had to play a real active role in making sure I could champion that and ensuring the right resources and expertise were brought to the table to make sure the programs and initiatives and interventions were relevant for the profession and the members. And we had there's a significant milestone there in terms of the first mental fitness survey. As accountants, we love data, and we needed a baseline to understand the lay of the land and to inform some of the program of activity. And we had over 1,000 respondents, I think, at that time. And some of the results were pretty damning. Over 60%, over 2/3 of respondents had experienced poor mental health, and actually, probably more importantly, a lot were not aware of the support provided, or really feared the consequences of speaking up and talking about this topic in the workplace. And so, for me, in terms of my leadership role, it really created this sense of sort of urgency, and helped to shape and inform some of my leadership priorities. And I recognized, I needed to speak up and lead by example and be quite vocal as an office bearer, and be especially vocal as president in 2022 to talk about this topic. And I felt personally that visible leadership would help shift that culture. And personally, for me, it was quite the challenge. Coming from the South Asian background and community, we never really talked about mental health as a man, and never really talked much about mental health. So I had to go on my own personal journey to make sure I could really do that topic justice and really help shift the needle on that, and really made sure that there was space to encourage others. So council members and other CAs to talk about this, and create space in our external communications. Having a well-being section on the website and the CA magazine to try and really normalize and create a sort of safer environment for this topic. And then when I think about sort of my sort of broader role in governance, and we thought about the ICAS 2030 strategy and the ICAS rebrand that we see now, how do we embed some of these topics to reflect a more modern and inclusive sort of membership body? What does our role in education now look like? What does our role as a regulator look like? And how do we sort of support community and inclusion and embed that into the DNA of in the organization? Because ultimately, we as CAs, we're not machines, we're people, and we're navigating our personal and professional challenges. So there are lots of sort of elements to this, a lot of perspectives that really shaped my leadership journey. And I think ultimately really showed me that sort of inclusive, well-being centered communities, they don't just happen organically and naturally. They need to be cultivated, they need to be modeled, they need to be embedded. And leadership can sometimes go beyond just the policies, and it's about sort of showing up with that authenticity and creating that professional environment, where people feel seen, supported, and able to thrive.
Thank you, Andy. Well, and there's so much that you achieved in your presidency, and you've probably highlighted, I'm guessing, a lot of things for people in the webinar that they possibly didn't know quite as much about in terms of what ICAS has been doing, and there's probably some areas that you do know a lot about. And I guess I'm interested, just off the back of what Indy's said there, maybe for Lisa and Rona, as a CAA, and I'm sure you'll probably agree, and I'm in an industry, and I run teams, and I see some of the challenges that some people may suffer with their mental health and well-being, and I'll often suggest that, for example, there is ICAS, there's other different support services out there, and there is a power of community to support them with that. I'm interested, actually, just in what Indy said there. What resonated with you, and what do you actually, in terms of what you see with your teams, what do you think are some of the things that are some of the stories that maybe you've heard, where ICAS or being an accountant maybe is a challenge, or where some of the things that Indy said there have then stepped in to help by having that community or raising the profile of mental health and mental fitness?
I think Indy really referred to the challenges that arose during COVID, and the specific situations that we had with isolation, etc., which have partly continued on as people have stayed in either hybrid working, or the isolation can be there. Where ICAS can really support is everyone's, especially if people are going through exams, everyone's going through the same thing. They can connect people together, support through lived experience and shared experience. So much is having someone to talk to, and someone who understands what you're going through, and that's really where ICAS as a community can support colleagues going through that exam process together, or potentially post-exam. How do you spend your time when you're not studying for every hour that you're not working? So having a group of people that have either gone through or are going through the same thing can be so important when you don't know where to turn. And the accessibility of the ICAS support, the more available that is easily, the more people can turn to it when they don't quite know where to go, and then have people that have gone through similar experiences will help for someone to talk to.
Thanks, Rona. Lisa, do you want to come in on that one before we?
Yeah, I think I just say I obviously agree with you there, Rona. And from my experience as well as an ICAS student, it is intense and it is a lot, and you kind of have all your focus on work or studying for so long. But it is really important to have others to turn to, and like to share that experience with, and kind of to go through together. And I guess as someone that works in industry as well, it definitely didn't feel perhaps as big as a community as maybe in some of the big four does as a student. But I think what I've then found for myself is, and I think, Rona, you mentioned it earlier, I think that's where the value comes in, and also getting involved in ICAS communities. So I've joined Members Board a couple of years ago, but like yourself with the ED&I committee or some of the area networks, I think there's so much opportunity as accountants to find community and get involved, even if that's not immediately available at work.
Yeah, I think what perhaps the audience might be interested in, certainly I'm interested in, is some of the points in time where, as accounting and finance professionals, we need support, whether it's through studying or even post-studying. I remember even after I finished studying and I was qualified, I remember thinking I should be absolutely elated, but I had this kind of funny feeling, thinking I'd lost a bit of sense of purpose, actually, and what do I do now? And I actually went on a low, not a high, and I found that really strange until I worked out where I then spend my time. So there's all these different points in time where we need help and support at points where perhaps we didn't even realise that we need it in those times. So supporting each other is absolutely critical. And Rona, when we spoke last week, I was really struck by your passion as a mental health first aider and how you spoke about supporting others in your team and more broader. And I know you've got tons of stories of impact. What are some of the, maybe just coming to you first of all, what are some of the most powerful lessons that you've learned in supporting others, and how might that help people on the call?
Thanks for that. One of the most important things to remember is, as a leader in an organization, you set the tone, you set the culture. So it's not, you're always visible to how you react to something. And if you're able to share, if you feel comfortable and you're able to share your own experience, that really resonates across the whole team. And it sets the tone that if you can share, someone else can also. The space and the safe space that Indy referred to is so important to allow people to speak. And because a shared challenge is always less than one that you have a burden on yourself. So as a leader and someone who wants to support mental wellness in your group, it's encouraging people to have that space, encouraging initiatives where people can support each other, but also that they can support themselves, maybe through sport or through going for a walk, not sitting at their desk worrying about something. It could be a walking meeting. You don't necessarily have to take time out from your working day to get some of these spaces and some of these things to do. As a mental health first aider, you're not a therapist. You're there. You learn techniques really to listen and to help signpost people towards areas of support. So it is important not to be talking to someone, but to be there for them when they're able to share what there's some challenges that they're having, listening in a positive way, and pointing them towards, it could be community, it could be the assistance programs, it could be maybe medical advice for them, but having that time to sit and listen to their what they're wanting to say. It's also very useful to encourage things like meditation. It's a very fast-paced environment that we all work in, and as accountants, we go through very peak periods of work where everything is very intense. You've possibly got pressures of trying to cope with personal things at the same time as it's very busy at work, etc. So being able to encourage time away from the desk in a quiet area. It doesn't have to be purpose-built. It could be a walk outside the office. It could be just going and sitting in a quiet corner of the office, and spending time just breathing, meditating, and getting a calmness that you can then go back and face challenges afresh for it. But I think in general, it's looking at the culture, creating that safe environment, creating a situation where people are comfortable talking, and that there is someone to listen to them if they require it. As I said, as a leader and a member of a team, even, is having that culture of acceptance and support when somebody is looking for some help.
Thanks, Rona. I'm interested in Indy and Lisa viewing that, because it is challenging so a lot of things you've highlighted there are all the things that we should absolutely be doing. But I'm sure there's a lot of people that are on this webinar that we sat there thinking, walking meetings. I love a walking meeting. So I'm a huge advocate of walking meeting, and creating that safe space, psychological safety. Everything you said, I think, is absolutely bang on. But I reckon there'll be some people that will think, well, how realistic is it to do a lot of those things? Maybe the managers don't, allow walking meetings. Maybe they know where to go for a walk, for example, or wherever it might be. What can we do that's really that is realistic, do we think, in terms of are there some things that really work, or are things where that actually is going to be a challenge based upon the workplace? Or do you think actually everything you've said there, I think it's realistic. I think they're all very practical steps, right? But there were some people that call thinking that's just going to be a bit tough in my environment. Maybe the environment is that you can't talk. Perhaps that's the environment where people don't share stories. They don't have that tone from the top. So I'm just interested in if Lisa and Indy's view.
I think for me, I think what I've noticed in the workplace is that, if I am more open about how I'm feeling, then others tend to be too. So I suppose even if there's not a structural tone from the top, perhaps, I think even at every level, if we start being more honest and just voicing when we're just not feeling well, I think that can help. Because I've definitely found that if I said to some people in my team before that I'm not doing well because of whatever reason, then they're more likely to reach out when they're not feeling well as well. So I think that's something we all can do. And in terms of creating the little mental headspace and meditating, for example, what I've done before when I was really busy, to just put 5-minute or 10-minute reminders in my diary, for example, once a day, which then kind of forced me to just step away from my laptop for a little bit and sit in a quiet corner, for example, and breathe. So yeah, I think there's small things that are definitely doable, even if it seems like we're all really busy.
And they're all very, very, very important points raised there. I mean, from my perspective, as Rowan was speaking there, it reminded me of one of the initiatives that I'd undertaken when I was office bearer, and that was sort of the student induction event, sort of, going out and around the UK and meeting all the students just before they're about to start their training. And, I was very honest with my own journey and how challenging the exams are, and to say that, there were times where I wasn't okay. I found it very, very difficult. But they, and then signposted what support there is and what helped me personally. And I thought it was very important to share that. And I lost count of the number of students that came up to me after just to say thank you for saying it's okay. I'm feeling a bit worried about going into these exams. And we've all been through the process, and I'm sure the people on this call have been through that process. And the examination process isn't easy, and just being authentic and open about that, I think really, really helped. And then to the piece around sort of some of the initiatives and whether they work in the workplace, I've always found that, for everyone, everyone's got their own, what I like to call mental health or mental fitness toolkit. And there's certain tools that, you might personally find work better for you than others. And I've also personally found those that are slightly averse to talking about it, think it's not relevant in the workplace, or, this doesn't work for me. I know there's a lot of people might be thinking, meditation or breath work doesn't really work for me. And when you start talking and having conversation, you start to realize everyone has their own sort of, own sort of tools that they've got in their toolkit. They may not necessarily link it to their mental health or mental fitness immediately, but it's definitely there. Getting some sunshine first thing in the morning, that quiet cup of tea, just 5 minutes, just to sort of help prepare for the day, getting all their thoughts out for the day onto a piece of paper, effectively journaling, for example. So again, it's that piece where I'm just breaking that some of the stigma down and making some of those links around some of these activities and how they support well-being. And I agree with you, Johnny. I don't think none of these are out the realms of the possibility in most workplaces, and it's just about how you sort of incorporate them effectively. And it shouldn't be seen as doing some of these things detracts you from your work. Not at all. In fact, it helps improve your sort of your output, your capability, your productivity. So it's a win-win for everyone effectively.
Yeah,
I think also, sorry, Johnny. I think also in that the one thing that people have sometimes said, it's okay for the likes of myself because I work for a big organisation that's very supportive of mental wellness. However, everyone can take it upon themselves to ask someone, "Are you okay?" Because that can make a huge difference. If you have a colleague or a friend that is you're seeing signs of strain in them, just being asked, "Is everything okay? Do you want to talk about anything?" It takes 2 minutes, and you don't need an organizational structure to do that. So it's partly the support that organizations are giving people, but also everyone can do a small thing in their own way to support their friends, their colleagues. And sometimes it purely is just a very short, "Are you okay?" Or smile at them.
I think you're absolutely right, and perhaps I could reflect on a couple of things that have been said and bring a few things to the audience. Which my learning in all this, as you say, is actually the small things. You know, I personally, I used to be. If you saw me 10, 20 years ago to see me now, I used to be, really would, and I wouldn't have shared a thing in work. I thought you had to come into work and, look and sound a certain way and say things a certain way. And then my journey completely shifted. And I realized in my own leadership journey that me being more in touch with how I was feeling and my ability to share that and feel comfortable sharing would make a huge difference. And I remember giving the keynote speech at the ICAS's mission ceremony a number of years ago, and I talked about mental health. Now, accountants are not exactly known for being out there talking about the mental health, and I was really worried about it. Sat up there speaking to students about it, and afterwards, the amount of people that came up to me that said me sharing a story about my own journey of mental health and well-being made a huge difference to them. And I started to get these LinkedIn messages through, and I thought, wow, all I did was share a story. And there's this most incredible saying out there that says, each time we share a story, we send a lifeboat of hope. And I do think storytelling is sending more lifeboats. It really is. And I think through storytelling, we can create that sense of community. And it sounds so small, but it's so big. And I think if we create the sense of community, then that helps us create psychological safety. I remember a number of years ago, actually one of the leaders at the Mental Health Foundation, who's hosting this week, shared with me the most eye-opening presentation about what psychological safety was. And I thought, wow, totally get it. I hadn't thought about it in that way at all. And there are all these psychological hazards in the workplace. But if we can remove those psychological hazards, it can significantly drive performance. There's lots of studies out there that show that if you create a sense of psychological safety, you drive performance, and you become more creative and you generate more revenue, more profits. Why wouldn't you want to do it? And we're all accountants, so it's a win-win, isn't it? Create a great environment, but something gets in the way of it, doesn't it? Something gets in the way of it because we get down into task. So I think there are a few things that you've all said that does lead into that psychological safety, but I think community can be at the heart of creating that. So perhaps with that in mind, we could come on to Lisa for a moment. And your journey is quite a unique one, isn't it? Because you lived in many different places, you've navigated that successfully, you're someone who had quite a unique experience going through training during a pandemic. And you've spoken about the importance of support and community early in your career and the way you manage your well-being through your own fitness journey as well. What support would you like to see for people earlier on in their careers or in the workplace that from your experience?
I guess as a student, and we all know that we've all been through it, it is extremely stressful. I guess it comes with a lot of self-doubt and also pressures to perform. I guess we all know how important the exams are. We're starting in a workplace after university a lot of the time. So it's all new, it's all daunting. And a lot of times you just don't know anyone either. So I think support I'd like to see, it probably depends on what people need and what they want, but I think what helps is obviously the own community, I guess, of graduates within whatever company it is. I think that's one big one that helps as well too, and I guess it's on firms to try help facilitate that as well. It often happens organically, but I think that's a big one because those are probably the people you see most. But what we had as well is kind of a buddy system with previous graduates, and I think for me that was really helpful to talk to someone that's a bit further ahead in the journey, but that I can ask the questions that I just feel sometimes a bit too stupid to ask my manager, for example, or someone else. So I think something like that is incredibly helpful. And I think, it was obviously more difficult during the pandemic to make this happen, but I think it's just to bring the graduates together. So I think what ICAS is doing now with the new induction event, I think that's a really good step as well for people to meet each other and also to hear a bit more about what ICAS has to offer. Same with any of the support services, and just pinpoint that to ICAS students as well, that there is support and that you just in a way need to reach out. But I think other than that, it's probably also from every manager in the workplace or even colleagues to just ask the questions with how are you doing, or where can you help, even if it's not with studying. Maybe it's with workload, or maybe it's just with the self-doubt that comes with it as well. So it's probably more about those little things once again.
Any interest in Indy and Ron, your perspectives on that, because line managers are also really important in this, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. And the line manager needs to understand what the students are going through. And I think with the new curriculum, we have to make sure that line managers of ATOs understand that the exam process has changed. It's online now. It's not back in the day when I trained, we all went for block for 2 weeks at a time, and everybody all knew each other, and we created our own community, you know, from that, which if you're online isn't necessarily as available anymore. But I think you touched on it about both the induction but also the celebration once you qualify. I think it's great that ICAS are doing that. The induction was new this year, and I really support the start of that, because it builds that community and that bond from the beginning. You know what ICAS can support you with, but also you know that there is a room full of people, a lot of people going through the same thing, and you can create your networks and support through that initial first day as well. So I think that's a really strong initiative that ICAS has introduced this year.
Just to add to that, I mean, you know, I'm very glad that Lisa mentioned the student induction events, because I think they're an important touch point. And I know from even the higher education sector, you know, learning pedagogy has changed significantly post-pandemic, you know, and I think there was a view that all learning would be virtual, and that's not the case. You know, in-person touch points, you know, that classroom discussion and engagement is so valuable and so important, and you're seeing that being embedded into sort of modern learning curriculum, and that's definitely the case with the sort of the new ICAS syllabus. We're seeing that in the higher education sector as well, and that sort of physical touch point is extremely important. And the piece there around sort of having someone to talk to, whether it's a buddy system or someone just outside of your direct line management, so you can have some of those more informal conversations, I think is so important. And you know, during that time, we really sort of championed the ICAS mentoring platform as well, the digital tool to sort of connect members across sectors, across geographies, whether you want to try and speak to someone a bit further ahead in their career, or whether you want to be a mentor yourself. So really encouraging that sort of peer-led growth, which is really important to sort of, you know, reduce that sort of feeling of isolation.
And that feeling of isolation is interesting, isn't it? Because it can be so pervasive. It's so difficult. Isolation, loneliness. It is really tough. And I'm wondering if we could send a few lifeboats, actually, whether that's through our own personal experience or perhaps through the experience of others that we've helped and supported. When has communities really helped you? You know, I certainly know from my own personal experience, when I started talking about my own journey on mental health and also in the workplace, I found it really difficult because I was making a bit of a shift myself. And I found some other mental health advocates who just became the most incredible community for me, and actually gave me confidence that what I was doing was actually okay, because it was really out there for me to be talking about, you know, this type of thing. And in some of my moments of doubt, where I would go and I would share things about, you know, my past, or I'd share things around how I was feeling or whatever, I would have done that. But those communities were people that gave me that safety, and there's a bit of safety numbers as well to that. And finding people that were like-minded in that sense really helped me. That was my community. And actually, I've got an incredible community of other the D&I and the mental health and other social ability advocates and people that I could pick up the phone to, and it is just so helpful for me, and has kept me on the course. Actually, I'm wondering if you know, Rona, Lisa, or Indy, you've got any examples where communities really helped you or people close to you.
I'm happy to share an example that sort of comes to mind. I mean, a few years ago, I went through a bit of a sort of, you know, personally quite difficult time and needed to get sort of external help and support. And, you know, one of the sort of recommendations were to consider sort of, you know, mindful breathing and breath work. And we went through sort of what that looks like. And then immediately it clicked and reminded me of, you know, my interest in the sort of physical sports environment. So I used as a young boy, I trained in Thai boxing, Muay Thai, and competed at semi-pro level. But as you get older, your time commitments change, and I sort of stopped any kind of physical activity. And then immediately, as we talked about the sort of physical breath work and what that looks like, mindful breathing, what that looks like, it reminded me of sort of using that exact technique when you're trying to get through a plateau in terms of strength training or any kind of physical endurance activities. And I was like, well, that's exactly the same as what I would do in that context. And the therapist was like, well, that's perfect because you'll get the double benefit of the physical activity and the breathing activity. So I immediately went back to my old sort of Muay Thai club that I went to, my old instructor, and immediately felt that sense of community because it was very familiar. There was some sort of familiar faces, some new faces, and he said to me, sort of, where have you been? And I sort of, just shared a little bit with him. And he said something to me that always stuck with me. He said, "Well, Indy, look, you've been training since a young age. You're a son of martial arts. This is the part of you and a part of your identity." And that really, I really felt that sort of sense of community, and it was a really pivotal time for me because I recognized that actually that kind of physical activity, whether it's Muay Thai, whether it's doing CrossFit, which is a type of strength training rooted in community as well, is a core part of my kind of mental fitness toolkit. And I kind of had to verbalize that and be quite clear with myself that that's a foundational aspect for my sort of own mental health and well-being. So when you shared that, I thought that example immediately came to mind.
Can I just say something to take a moment for a minute? What people often have a view as to what people hold certain positions are. You're the president of ICAS, Indy, right at the top pinnacle, and you've just shared that. And I think that is so powerful. I think that's so powerful. And talk about tone from the top. And if we were sat here 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago and said, you know what, even the president of ICAS isn't perfect. I'm not even sure they would, the president of ICAS would even, maybe not have said that, but, times have changed, right? I just think that you can often look up and you think, these people, they don't have any issues. But actually we've all got things going on in our life. I think that's so powerful, Indy, and thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure people on the call will feel that as well. Lisa, I'm guessing with the subject of Thai boxing, you probably want to come in there, but part of me is thinking, whatever you do in this call, don't mess with Lisa and Indy, because we've got a Thai boxing specialist, a semi-pro apparently, and we've got a power lifter.
Yeah, I think thanks for sharing, Indy. And yeah, I think for me it was a bit of a similar experience. I think I found really powerlifting in the community when I was really struggling with my mental health and kind of really struggled, day to day as well. I was not that long in Scotland, I suppose. A lot of relationships have changed and just had that feeling of isolation, I suppose, combined with a lot of work pressure and the exams and everything. So that's when I then decided to join a new gym and just, try it out and see. And it's an incredibly small gym, and it was really scary at the start, I think, because you can't really hide behind your headphones or everything. But it was one of the best things I've done, because that kind of gave me that sense of community. You're in there and you're training, and even after a tough day, people are there to cheer you on and help out as well, and they also want to see you succeed. So I think that's something really powerful, that we can all have a really stressful day, come in a bit of a bad mood, but then we're kind of there and we support each other. That all changes. And I suppose it's also one of those physical outlets, like you said, Indy. It's so important as well as for me, as well as my mental health toolkit. And I think also the kind of like incremental improvements you make in training. So I think that helps quite a lot as well, to have those little moments of success, even when it feels like work is all a bit too much or isn't going in the right direction, for example. So I think that's already powerful. But I think, yeah, it's definitely one of the things that really helped me, just to find that community and some people to lean on, really, that are there to support you.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And we're going to, in a second, just move on to audience Q&A. But Rona, do you have anything else to add on this subject before we move on to audience Q&A?
I think just a couple of things. I think we're all quite dangerous. Back in the day, I used to play hockey, so there was nothing more satisfying if you've had a very stressful week to hit something very hard with a wooden stick, and it's certainly got your tensions out. But I think with regards to sort of leadership, setting the tone that we talked about, it was very much seen as sort of as a leader of a team, you had to be the strong one for everybody. And it is important that you can share the challenges that you've had. You don't have to cover everybody else's work or sacrifice yourself to take pressure off the team. Especially during COVID, I found it was very difficult I started not really taking holidays necessarily, and I found that really had an impact on both myself and my performance. And I know that I perform better when I have had a break, have had a holiday. So it's making sure that you both share the challenges that you've had with your colleagues and your community, but also that you look after yourself as well, because you can't look after others unless you're in a good state yourself. So making sure that you get that balance as well, and take your time to take time out, take a holiday, or do the things that's in your wellness toolkit to make sure that you're at your best.
Perfect, thank you. And there's some really good tips and examples in there. So on the point about struggling, let's move on to audience Q&A. At the moment, I'll probably take two or three questions, and I'll start with one which is around, and this is always something I've thought about, and I'm sure you've thought about it. And let's get these relatively sharp, given we're almost at time. And how do you start a conversation with a line manager if you're struggling? Perhaps, Indy, you could come in first on that.
Yeah, sure. I think, I've always tried to sort of carve out, time with a line manager if I'm working directly with them, and just be quite honest and upfront. And as I've always taken that approach, if I'm coming through a professional, facing a professional challenge or personal challenge that could be impacting my sort of professional workplace, to just be quite upfront about it and quite direct about it.
Yeah, good. Lisa, do you have any? Sorry, Bruna.
So I think if you really don't feel comfortable talking to someone, find somebody you do feel comfortable and get their advice, their support, to either practice what you're wanting to say to your manager, or ask them to sort of, is there a mental health first aider or a colleague that you know and trust, for ways that you can use ways of conversation to get to the point that you're wanting to talk through, or have a skip with your manager's manager. I'm not saying you go above your manager and take away the line of command, but you should have that conversation. Don't keep it to yourself, and don't let it fester within you. Make sure you have that conversation with somebody.
I think that's absolutely right. So we'll keep moving through the questions because we're almost at time. And as we do that, I believe a poll should now be with you for the audience members. So to rate this session, so feel free to complete that survey, which is now about to come up on your screen. It's come up on my screen, so I'll be giving it 5 stars. Right, quickly moving on. Wasn't expecting that. So, question really. Post-COVID, clearly working life has changed, and some for the better, some for the more challenges, and clearly moving into the hybrid working environment, for some people, super helpful, for others, less so. What are some of the tips that we can give on how we best support our mental health and well-being in a hybrid working environment? And perhaps come to Lisa first. I'm really interested also in your view as well as a student that's come through this, because we often, I was having a conversation the other day around role modeling for students and younger members. It's really important that the role the workplace has. So I'm really interested, and I'm sure other people will be interested in your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think making sure people or looking after people's well-being. I think it's again about asking questions as well, like Rona said earlier. I think it's just making it a priority as well. So I think with virtual meetings, there's definitely the tendency to get straight to business and not really have that normal, I guess, chit chat you would have in person. So I definitely try to, ahead of a meeting, to talk to people first, asking how their weekend was, how they're doing, rather than jumping straight to it. I think that's a really important one. But I think other than that, it's probably just making time for meetings and check-ins as well. I know my company's pretty good at that, to prioritize these, but I think just to make sure that there are as many as, you know, non-work related interactions in there as well to make sure people are okay.
And Indy, thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, in a virtual and hybrid environment, people, you know, can struggle quietly. You lose those sort of everyday cues, the body language, someone's energy, just noticing they're not quite themselves. So I think you've got to be quite intentional with making that connection. So do you design moments for check-in? I know in my sort of consultancy environment, we have sort of weekly, just broader weekly check-ins, start of the week, you know, is everyone feeling okay in terms of what they've got on, not going to specifics, but are they okay with their workload? You know, have they got any blockers, challenges? And at the end of the week, maybe a sort of, you know, quick 15-minute check-in of, you know, how's the week gone? How are you feeling about it? So it kind of allows that and builds that into the structure of the calendar schedule.
Yeah. Thank you. Some good tips. I think the check-ins start of the week is a good one. So I'll keep moving us through the questions because a few more have now come in. And we just talked about students, and I think that's clearly a big focus area. And one person has asked, as a student, they feel the pressure to always perform or meet a certain standard. I certainly felt that, that's for sure. And how do you manage self-doubt or imposter feelings in these moments, perhaps? Rona, you've got a perspective on that.
I think we've mentioned buddies before is always useful. There's people that have gone through this before. You're not alone. Imposter syndrome and self-doubt happens to everybody sitting these exams, and often post exams as well. You qualify and think, oh my goodness, am I? I'm qualified on paper. Am I really equipped as a CA in the wide world? So it really is having that network of people that you can talk to that understand that people are going through the same thing as you. Yes, the exams are hard, but you are doing these exams because you're very capable. You have come through either the apprentice program or through a degree, and you have shown that you have the capability. But nothing is ever the end of the world. It's an exam. If you're not ready for the exam and you have to defer, or if you're not successful in this exam, take stock, take a step back, and you can try again. But don't try not to build it into more than it is. But talk to your colleagues, talk to your peers, share your experiences, because I've no doubt everyone's going through the same thing.
Yeah. Some really good tips here, and perhaps you can squeeze in another question, because we've got a few really good ones here, because it dovetails nicely into what you've just said there, which is, if you as a line manager think that somebody might be struggling with their mental health, how might you start a conversation with one of those people? Any thoughts?
I think one of the first things is how are you? It's being things. I think a conversation can start very easily. Do you fancy a coffee? It doesn't even have to be in the office. Let's go to a coffee shop. Let's go for a walk. Or even if someone just wants to sit down and you say, how are things? Open questions. No, not pressure on how did the exam go? Do you think you've passed? What's your next exam doing? Like, where are you in the moment? Let's take a breath. How are things? I think it was mentioned before, it doesn't all have to be about work. It can be, what did you do at the weekend? Did you manage to get a break? Did you manage to get and sit in the sunshine for half an hour or whatever? But the first thing is, how are you? Do you fancy a catch up? Do you fancy a chat? Do you fancy a coffee? An opening question that can start that conversation, and work to and listen. Don't dictate the conversation. Listen, so the person can lead to where there's something that maybe they're struggling with, or a question that they've got for you.
Thank you. Sorry, Indy, you were going to come in there?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think it's really around listening, creating that safe space for conversation, and just nudging that if you recognize someone's been off slightly, you can kind of reference it and just just ask the question, you know, how are you doing? Are you okay? And Johnny, I just want to go back to the previous question asked by the student, because I think it's an important one, and for me personally as well. I mean, we've all experienced it. I've experienced it multiple times. I experienced it when I'd become an office bearer, when I'd become ICAS president. And I think, you know, what really helps is just to reframe that for the student that asked that question, because, you know, you got to, I think it's about owning those feelings. It doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're growing. You know, they tend to show up, you know, generally when you're stretching yourself and you're stepping into new territory, and that's a good thing. You know, the age-old saying, you know, growth doesn't happen in comfort zones, right? So it's a good sign, and take it as a good sign. And sometimes you have to just, I find I sit with that emotion, sit with that feeling, and own it rather than be worried about it and think it's a bad thing. And you've got to just remind yourself of the facts. You know, you've got to keep a list of your wins, your accomplishments, and at the same time, just know that you don't have to be perfect. It's about continuous growth and development, not getting it right the first time. Growth is enough, is more than enough on its own. I'm sorry, I just want to go back to that because it was quite important, and I'm sure we all have that feeling. So as a student, you have it, and I think throughout your career, it will be there. It's a normal part of life, and it's a normal part of professional development.
Thank you, Indy. I think that's a perfect place to start to wrap up through practical examples there. So let's start to bring this to a close. To first of all, just thank the audience for their questions. And as we wrap up, there's a couple of things I want to touch on. One is just get your closing remarks, and then signpost some really important pieces that you're going to hear from ICAS over the coming week. So in a sentence, if I just go around each of you, what's the one action you think we might take to support someone's well-being this week in light of community? So just in a sentence, Lisa.
I think it's just asking people how they are. I think that's what we came back to quite a lot, is just, you know, communicating with people, checking in, and just offering help where we can.
Perfect. Thank you. Indy.
I think that there's a huge value in sharing perspectives, sharing how you're feeling, just to break that stigma down, especially if you're in an environmental sector where, you know, this isn't a topic that people are generally comfortable talking about. You can be the leader in that space to really move the dial.
Perfect. And Rhoda?
Listen, you can initiate the conversation, but don't try and drive it to your agenda. Listen to the individual you're talking to and let them share their feelings.
Thank you very much. And if I was to summarize what I've heard, isn't it really, it sounds quite simple, doesn't it? A lot of things I've talked about here is being there for people, listening, sharing stories, and opening up a conversation, helping people feel safe. And I think that is absolutely perfect as we focus this week on community. So a big thank you to panelists for your openness and your insight, and for joining the conversation. And as you heard up front, ICAS is now expanding its wellbeing services to all members and students. And if you'd like to explore the full range of support services now available, including our confidential counselling, a legal and financial helpline, also a new wellbeing app, then please visit icas.com and search for the Wellbeing Hub. A direct link will be provided to you after this event. We do encourage you to keep this conversation going in your teams, in your networks, your personal circles, and of course, your communities. And together, we're going to build a culture where mental well-being is supported, not just during Mental Health Awareness Week, of course, but each and every day. Now, looking ahead, ICAS has a range of fantastic events coming up, which you may wish to sign up for. On the 11th of June, we have the ICAS Practice Conference. It's Thrive in 25 and Thrive in 2025 in Glasgow. This year's lineup has got a whole host of expert speakers who will lead the way on tackling some of the biggest issues that are impacting members in practice. So do head there if that is of interest. And of course, the one big one to signpost is on the 5th of November, we have the ICAS annual conference in London. Now, this event brings together business leaders, policymakers, chartered accountants from a range of industries and sectors to explore some of the biggest challenges and opportunities shaping the profession. I would strongly encourage you to go to icas.com/events and look out for those two events. And it just leaves me finally to thank our speakers, thank our audience for joining the webinar today. We hope you found it useful. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you and goodbye.